We've talked about Create React app doing a lot of stuff for us, right? We haven't really clarified what exactly that means. I'm going to make a copy of NoteHerder. Called NoteHerder ejected. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. You can just watch. But don't run these commands on your copy unless you make a copy of the copy. So the great thing about Create React app is that when starting completely from scratch, there's a lot you have to do just to get React working at all. Because remember, the stuff that we write in the source directory doesn't run in the browser, right? It has to go through a build process first. Partially because we use JSX. If we used React.create component and stuff all the time, we might be able to write a version of this that doesn't need a build system. But because we use JSX and because we use some kind of bleeding edge JavaScript, it needs to go through this transpilation process where it transforms from what we're writing into an older version of JavaScript the browsers can actually understand. And it gets minified so that it gets way, way smaller and doesn't take nearly as much bandwidth for people to download. Not everyone has a super fast connection. I don't know if you've noticed that these last few weeks. So that requires some sort of build system so that we have commands like npm build and npm deploy and npm start. Start not only runs a web server, it also compiles all our crap. So there are lots of build systems for JavaScript. Two of the most common are Browserify and Webpack. The React community has pretty much landed on Webpack these days. If they hadn't before Create React app came out, they sure have now because it used it. And so that makes it, that's a pretty strong endorsement from Facebook, frankly. So what does it do? If you look at your package.json, we don't have very many dependencies. In the dev dependencies, we only had React scripts. We added GH pages, right? We just had React scripts and React and React DOM. That's all that was in there. Well, guess what? We have a lot more dependencies than that. It's just they're all sub-dependencies of React scripts. If you look at all these scripts, they all just call React scripts something else. There's actually a lot more going on. If we want to see all our real configuration, we can run yarn eject or npm run eject, and it will give us all of that stuff. But it is irreversible, so don't run it on your copy of NoteHerder unless you make a copy like I did. Then it's safe. And now I want this to be the one that I have open in code. Why on earth would you want to do that? Well, if you ever wanted to change the configuration from their default. So, for example, one thing we're doing is running everything through Babel, which supports JSX and supports some newer ECMAScript syntax. But Babel is configurable, and you can tell it just how crazy bleeding edge to go. You can make it so that it will include syntax that is still at stage 0 of ECMAScript. But that's not the default in Create React app. You may choose to do other things with CSS, like use Css modules. One thing I've pointed out a few times is that just because we import this CSS in this component, that doesn't do anything to tie it to this component. All our CSS is getting compiled into a single file at the end. So the only reason this manages to apply only to this component is because we were careful in all the components except this one to prefix everything with that class. And we know we're only using it the one place. But what if we weren't using it only the one place? Well, you can use something called CSS Modules, and that will dynamically generate some classes that actually tie these things directly to a particular component so that there's no chance of polluting other components with the styles you apply to one. You have to import them slightly differently and use them a little differently inside your JSX. But it's a pretty cool thing, and lots of people do it. And you can't do it with Create React App unless you eject. There are some other things that are not in there by default, like CSS preprocessors like Sass. Has anyone ever heard of Sass or used it? Less would be another one. Sass stands for Syntactically Awesome Style Sheets. It lets you, among other things, nest rules inside each other so that you don't have to say note list space h3, note list space everything else under the sun. You could say dot note list, curly brace, and then put all the rules inside those curly braces, and it would figure that out, figure out the descendant thing. Regular CSS doesn't do that. So stuff like that, which sometimes is way easier to read and way easier to write. So if you want to use that kind of style sheet, that's not built in to Create React App. But another cool thing about Create React App is they keep working on it. They keep responding to the way people are using it. Lots of people were ejecting just so they could do that. So they made it possible now to use a preprocessor like that without ejecting and unloading all your config files. So the README again for Create React App is really, really good. There's a user guide in here that has lots and lots of stuff. So hey, add a CSS preprocessor. It tells you how. Now all you have to do is add one more dependency and change a couple of scripts in package.json. And voila, you have Sass. You don't have to eject for that. But for CSS modules, you do. And some people just have very specific builds that they want to do, so they want to screw around with Webpack themselves. Webpack's complicated, and we don't want to do that. But if we did, we could always run yarn eject. It'll warn us, are you sure you want to eject? This action is permanent. Yep, sure. Okay, great. Notice, please consider sharing why you ejected in this survey. So they're keeping track of why people find it necessary to eject and write their own configs. So if enough people say it's because of CSS modules, maybe they'll add support for CSS modules directly in Create React App, so you don't have to. We did it for fun, because we just want to see what will happen. So let's look at package.json now. Oh, well, that's a few more dependencies. Good times. That's a whole lot more dependencies. Also, it added 2 folders. Config and scripts. Scripts. Now we have our build script. Oh, okay. I wish I'd never seen that. Start to run our web server. Okay. Yep, I was better off not knowing. Config. Okay, this has to do with testing. Inv.js. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Paths, polyfills. What are polyfills? I think I used that word 2 weeks ago. Yeah. Yeah, support for older browsers. If you're using some newer like HTML5 features, polyfill scripts attempt to sort of mimic that behavior. Webpack config dev, Webpack config prod. Why are there 2 different ones? In development mode, you may remember that when we make changes to our code, it changes live. That change is affected immediately in the server. And in fact, it refreshes our browser for us. In a production environment, you don't want that. You don't want to deploy every time you change a piece of code. So that's one difference between dev and prod. But let's see what a Webpack config looks like. Okay, bunch of plugins. HTML Webpack plugin, case-sensitive paths plugin, ESLint formatter, get client environment, whatever. This is very thoroughly commented, which is nice. Facebook did put lots of comments in here, so you can kind of get an idea of how Webpack works by reading this. But basically, this is the thing that determines how this build folder is built, which contains what actually gets deployed to the web server. It copies all the static stuff over from public. It smashes all our JavaScripts in here together. It runs them through Babel, and Babel does all kinds of stuff with them. It deals with all of the images that we import in here, because importing images right into JavaScript, that's kind of weird. So some of this you can tell by reading or by reading the comments what it's doing. But it's also doing all of that. It's doing all the minifying as well as the transpilation, running it through Babel. Notice there's some configuration things in here, like all of these file extensions, it'll treat as JavaScript, sort of. I mean, JSON's JSON, but if you use an extension other than that, it won't work. As long as you call it .js or .jsx. And all kinds of other stuff. So you may just find that you want to change some of these things. The way that it handles bits and pieces of this. Either way, it's just good to be aware of the fact that, guess what? In 5 days or whatever we've done it, you haven't learned everything about React. And Webpack is one of the big gaps. We haven't learned anything about how to do our own build system. But you can get by for quite a while with Create React App. And Eject if you need to. If you are a Webpack expert and want to do your own build system. Or if it just includes some extra things that you don't want. Maybe you don't want all of these things. It already includes some CSS processing. I saw post CSS in there. Where, let's see, config, Webpack. Post CSS loader applies auto prefixer to our CSS. So sometimes newer CSS properties, support is added to the browsers before it's really been standardized. So they implement those with special prefixes on the properties. Like you might have -moz transition, and that would be a rule that only applies in Mozilla browsers. -webkit whatever. So this will automatically add those rules if you have the standard version in there. So that people who have versions of that who haven't implemented the standard version, but who really did support this thing in a previous iteration, it'll automatically add those CSS rules. So that's kind of nice. So that's built in. But post CSS can do a lot of other stuff too, and that's the only piece of it that's built in. So you would have to, you could add your own plugins here if you wanted. So that is a very quick look at Webpack and stuff and what happens when you, all the stuff that Create React App hides from us. You dig? What about some homework? Yeah. That is a good looking sign-in page, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, it's pretty good, but try to make it look even better if you can. It's hard. Already a work of art. So day 11 homework, make the sign-in page prettier. Super mega bonus credit. And yes, this is super mega bonus credit for a reason. It's hard. Add a rich text editor to the form. What? So make it so that you can put bold and italics and unordered lists and stuff inside a note. A rich text editor. Where to even start? www.google.com. All right. Good luck on your interviews or your fake interviews. And we'll see you tomorrow.